Join us on this 12.5 miles kayak from Whitney-On-Wye to Byecross Campsite on the Wye River on the 24th of August 2023. Watch on to learn about the dramatic scenery in the upper Wye Valley, how the river alternated between slow, steadily flowing sections on more turbulent sections of rapids, one of the nicest bridges on the Wye River at Bredwardine, and other useful information about this route and about kayaking the Wye River generally. Launching from the boat inn at Whitney-On-Wye at about 12 noon, we paddle downstream, passing Bredwardine Bridge before finally landing at Byecross Campsite at 5:45 p.m. We just parked up on the road outside of the boat inn at Whitney-On-Wye, where we're going to launch from. This is the launch just below the boat inn at Whitney-On-Wye. It's actually owned by the Pound B&B, which is right next door. It's just gone 12 noon, and as you can see, we've just launched from the boat inn, so it's 12.5 miles to Byecross. It's a great day for paddling, and we're passing some amazing scenery in the upper Wye Valley. There seemed to be a reasonable amount of water and flow in the river, which would assist us on our progression downstream. The scenery was stunning as we passed green pastures flanked by wooded bluffs. The foothills of the Black Mountains provided an amazing backdrop. The river was mostly deep and gently flowing along between 1 to 2 miles per hour as we paddled downstream from Whitney-On-Wye. We passed the campsite at Lockster's Pool, one of several campsites that we would pass on our way downstream. We had never previously tried kayak camping, but would love to try it someday. The Wye Valley is certainly blessed with a lot of good campsites. Despite the cloud cover, it was a warm day with a high of about 22 Celsius and light winds of about 7 miles per hour from the west. We passed the remains of Old Castleton, an early Norman castle which dates from around 1070. The motte is surrounded by an outer bailey with a protective rampart around it. This 12.5 miles journey was part of the Kayak Crew's undertaking to paddle every section of the 100 miles or so of the Wye River from Glasbury all the way down to Chepstow. This map shows how we broke the Wye River up into sections of between about 6 miles to 13 miles for our paddles. On this trip we used an Itiwit X100 2 or 3 person kayak that I'd recently bought from the Decathlon store at Cardiff. The Itiwit X100 is an inflatable kayak which can accommodate 2 adults or 2 adults and a small child, although it can also be used as a large solo kayak. It has a high pressure drop stitch floor which inflates to 5 psi and which provides a firm base to sit on. There is a smaller yellow coloured 1 or 2 person version of the Itiwit X100 that we previously did a review of. Having used the Itiwit X100 a number of times on rivers and on the coast, we've been pretty impressed with it. Occasionally the river got faster in sections when it became shallower and narrower, so we certainly had to keep our wits about us. Our fear was hitting a boulder at speed and ending up having a dunk in the water. We started to get a sense of inevitability that we were going to end up in the water. It was just as well that we had securely tethered down our cider rations. We're a bit cowardly when it comes to rapids, so we prefer gentle, slow-flowing sections of river. When we came across sections of rapids on the route, we had to weave back and forth to avoid hitting boulders underneath the water. It was a lot harder trying to spot these boulders from the kayak than it is when looking at them in hindsight via the drone footage, and there was a lot of last-minute evasion involved. Also, trying to avoid crashing into the trees overhanging the water added an additional element of excitement. We're not so much concerned for our own personal safety. Rather, we're more worried about losing all of our gear in the water if we manage to capsize. Much of the time we felt like we were paddling through a wilderness, other than the odd occasion when we passed some fishermen or a campsite. We hardly saw any other paddlers on this route, which is a much quieter section than some of the lower sections, such as the ones down near Kern Bridge and Simmons Yacht. Although we prefer taking a tandem kayak compared to taking 2 solo kayaks, trying to synchronize our paddling was more challenging than we thought. The trees lining the banks were still heavily laden with their summer foliage, with their branches drooping down into the water. You've got to be careful not to kayak into these overhanging branches, or otherwise you can get snarled up in them and tipped out of your kayak, as happened to Archie's son Ewan once when we were kayaking on the Wye River near Swansea. We would suggest that you always check the water level of any non-tidal river before you plan a kayak on it. We use the website Riverlevelsuk, which is live readings for gauging stations along most rivers. You need to check that the water level is comfortably within the normal or green segment of the gauging station reading before you go. We stopped for a lunch break about a third of the way along the route. Unfortunately, some of the local cows have decided to invade our picnic.
What's my cider?
Archie's worried that they're after his cider. The traditional cider stop and lunch break is the highlight of our trips. It looks like one of the cows wants to have a ride in our Itiwit. I'm not quite sure there's enough room for it, to be honest. We're back on the river and heading downstream, suitably refreshed and rejuvenated after our lunch and cider stop. There's a helicopter been buzzing around us for the last 10 minutes or so. I expect it's the local Coast Guard who heard that the Kayak Crew were back out on the water. That scraping noise is the sound of our skegs dragging on the bottom of the river. We'd fitted two of the longer Itiwit skegs on the back of the kayak to aid with tracking. That tall monopod on the front of the kayak is the selfie stick for my Insta360 X3 camera. By 3 PM we were about halfway along the route and nearing Bredwardine. Access points for paddling on the Wye River are relatively few and far between. The only other location along this route that we identified where you could land and launch would be at Bredwardine Bridge. At Bredwardine you can park just up the road from the bridge in a large lay-by and land or launch just underneath the bridge. We're about 7 miles along the route and just downstream there you can see Bredwardine Bridge coming up. The lovely red brick bridge at Bredwardine is said to be one of the nicest bridges on the entire Wye River. We unfortunately didn't have time to stop at the Red Lion, which is a 17th century coaching inn just up the road from the bridge. Regarding logistics, at Whitney-On-Wye there is a canoe and kayak launch just below the boat inn. This is not actually owned by the boat inn itself, but rather is owned by the Pound B&B, which is right next to the launch. We phoned the Pound B&B the day before we kayaked and cleared with them that we could use the launch, subject to paying the £5 launch fee. At Whitney we parked on the road just in front of the boat inn. At Byecross there is a canoe launch and landing at Byecross Farm Campsite. We had phoned Byecross Farm Campsite the day before and checked with them that we could use their canoe and kayak launch to land and also that we could park there. It cost £9 to park and to land our kayak at Byecross Farm Campsite. We had obviously left the vehicle at either end of the route for this journey. It's quite a remote area and there's not really any feasible options for using buses. If you only had one vehicle, then your only other option would be to try and book a taxi from one of the companies in Hereford or maybe Hay-on-Wye. In terms of pubs and restaurants, the most obvious option is of course the boat inn at Whitney-On-Wye, which is an excellent pub. We upload videos of all of our trips on the Wye River to our Wye River playlist on our YouTube channel. We also upload blogs of our trips to our Wye River blog page on our website, which is linked below. As we neared Byecross, we passed the village of Monington, which appears in the Doomsday Book of 1086. We had a bit of a mishap with the drone when I lost track of it for a while and couldn't tell whether it was upstream or downstream of us. Much to my relief, I was finally able to bring it back down safely to earth. I always try and keep sight of the drone and thought it was following us in tracking mode. Unfortunately, by the time I'd realised that it wasn't tracking us, the drone had gone AWOL. Towards 4:45, we approached Byecross Campsite, which you can see downstream of us here. If you enjoyed this video, then please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing by clicking on the left below to get updates of our trip reports, kayaking guides and product review videos. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of videos of our trips along other sections of the Wye River. Don't forget to check out our website, which is linked below. Happy paddling from the Kayak Crew.